penalized for exercising their free speech rights.
Well, the U.S. Senate is gaveling in, so we're going to break away from these comments and take you live inside the chamber.
Regulatory agencies that are trying to
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
We're on the nomination, is that right?
Senator is correct.
I rise today to speak in opposition to Magistrate Judge Chen, the President's nominee for Northern District, California. Before I address Judge Chen's nomination, I want to say a few words about our progress on judicial nominations. At the beginning of this Congress, I told the chairman that I would work with him to process consensus nominees at a fair and reasonable pace. Thus far, this Congress, I have worked very hard and in good faith to do just what I promised. We've confirmed consensus nominees with a particular focus on nominees in so-called judicial emergencies. I made that commitment to the chairman, and I've kept it. The Senate has been in session for only 46 days this Congress. In that short period, we have confirmed 20 judges. We confirmed 3 judges last week. In fact, thus far, we have taken positive action on 43 of 71 nominees that have been submitted to this Congress by the President. 20 have been confirmed, 13 have been reported out of committee, and 10 have had hearings in the committee. All total, we have taken positive action then on 61% of the judicial nominees submitted by the President during this Congress. Despite my good faith efforts, my colleagues from the other side continue to accuse us of not moving quickly enough. And I might add, the White House counsel continues to state publicly that we are not moving fast enough. Recently, the President's top lawyer spoke to a group of ABA members and asked them, quote, to bring home the impact or the effect of gridlock, end of quote. The President's lawyer neglected to tell the American Bar Association that the problem begins at the White House. In other words, the Senate can't act on nominees for judicial appointments if the President has not processed them and sent them to the Senate. The President has failed to send to the Senate a nomination for 50% of the current judicial nominees, and yet we have his White House counsel telling the American Bar Association, get on top of the Senate and tell them to get their job done, when we processed 61% of the ones that are up here and done it in 46 days that we've been in session, and somehow they expect us to process nominees that have been not submitted to the Congress. That is not possible. This statistically certainly does not indicate a sense of urgency on the part of the White House. In other words, the fact that the Senate has not even received 50% of the nominees for those vacancies. Notwithstanding my efforts to work together, the majority insists on taking detours and throwing up roadblocks to this cooperative effort. For example, last week, after moving forward with 2 district court judges, The Majority Leader filed cloture on one of President Obama's most controversial nominees, Mr. Jack McDonald. And now this week, the Majority Leader has turned to two more of the President's controversial nominees. Last night, we defeated a cloture petition for Mr. Cole, the President's nominee for Deputy Attorney General, and today we turn to Judge Chen. Of course, there are non-controversial nominees that the Senate could turn to. We could confirm additional district judges as we have been doing. But rather than continuing to move forward with the consensus nominees, the other side has chosen to turn to the President's most controversial nominees. I must say this makes it extremely difficult to continue to work in good faith effort to move forward on non-controversial nominees. From our perspective, it appears that the more we try to work with the majority, the more that we're accused of not moving fast enough. And the pudding, the test, I guess, is in the pudding, in the general counsel for the White House telling the American Bar Association lawyers to get on the Senate to get more nominees confirmed. So the more we try to move consensus nominees, the more the other side insists on moving the President's most objectionable nominees. Judge Chen is not a consensus nominee. His nomination was considered during the last Congress and was voted out of committee on a party line vote. The nomination was returned to the President on more than one occasion. Despite our repeated and consistent opposition, the nomination was resubmitted this year. Again, it was reported out on a 10-8 party line vote. Despite the unanimous Republican opposition to the nominee, we have agreed to a short time agreement rather than engage in extended debate on this nomination. With that, I have some remarks regarding Judge Chen's nomination. At the outset, let me emphasize the basis of my opposition. It's based on Mr. Chen's judicial philosophy, on his own statements, and on his record. It is absolutely critical that our judges remain impartial. That's the independence of the judiciary. That's why it's independent. Their job is to interpret law, not to make law. Our system depends upon this independence and impartiality. For that reason, when judges put on a robe for the first time, they take a solemn oath that they will remain impartial. They swear that they will administer justice, quote, without respect to persons, and do equal right to the rich and the poor, end of quote. That is why we want to make sure that judges we confirm will set aside their personal opinions. We do not want their personal views to influence how they do their job. They are supposed to decide cases based on facts and on law, and nothing else. Unfortunately, there are some who believe that this notion of impartiality is somehow just plain old-fashioned and outdated. They believe that judges should not be limited to the facts and the law. Instead, they believe judges should look at the litigants themselves. The President seems to take this view. This is the heart of the so-called empathy standard. The problem, of course, is that empathy for one litigant is biased against the other. But Mr. Chen appears ready and willing to adopt and to apply the so-called empathy standard. He appears to be a member of the camp that believes that being completely impartial is just an old-fashioned view of judging. In 2003, as a sitting federal magistrate judge, he wrote an article that summed up his view, and I want to quote it, fairly long. Quote, "Judges have to make determinations that draw not so much upon legal acumen, but on an understanding of people and of human experiences. Such experiences inform assumptions that affect legal decisions. Simply put, a judge's life experiences affect the willingness to credit testimony or understand the human impact of legal rules upon which the judge must decide. These determinations require a judge to draw upon something that is not found in case reports that line the walls of our chamber. Rather, judges draw upon the breadth and the depth of their own life experience, upon the knowledge and understanding of people and of the human nature, end of quote. I'm sure that John Marshall would be turning over in his grave if he heard that about modern 20th century and 21st century judges. The problem with this approach is that it is the exact opposite of what judges are supposed to be. Judges are supposed to determine the facts and apply the law. That is what their oath demands, and that is what judges must do for our judicial system to remain independent and impartial. In addition to allowing empathy to affect his decision-making, Judge Chen appears willing to inject his personal views into judging. Both his writing and public comments, while as a magistrate judge, suggests that Judge Chen believes judges should interpret the law according to their personal understandings and preferences. This is a classic definition of judicial activism. For example, in discussing his work as a magistrate judge, he stated in a speech in 2007 before the American Constitution Society that he finds, quote, most rewarding contributing to the development of the law via published opinions, especially if it comports with my view of justice. Again, the problem here is that a judge's view of justice is very irrelevant. Judges are not policymakers. That's what we are in the Congress of the United States. Judges are called on to decide the facts and to apply the law. Their own view of justice is simply not relevant. Given that Judge Chen believes that a judge's personal views and experiences impact their decisions, it becomes important for us to understand his views and how they were shaped. Prior to becoming a magistrate judge, Judge Chen worked as a staff attorney at the ACLU for over 15 years. He was an advocate for the ACLU. He took very liberal positions on a variety of issues. I'd like to name just a few. He opposed private drug testing. He opposed anti-gang injunctions. He defended affirmative action. He harshly criticized English-only measures. And he argued that Alabama should be forced to give driving tests in languages other than English. Those who have defended Judge Chen's nomination have argued that we should not consider his work for the ACLU. And as I said, we have confirmed other nominees with strongly held personal views. But when a nominee says that personal views and experiences should and will influence how they approach cases, it becomes difficult to overlook their work on behalf of an organization like the ACLU. Judge Chen's advocacy on behalf of the ACLU is not disqualifying in and of itself. But it is hard to imagine why Judge Chen would devote so much of his professional career to the ACLU causes if he did not believe in them deeply. More importantly, given that in Judge Chen's view, personal views and personal experiences should influence how a judge decides cases, we have no choice but to examine Judge Chen's personal views and experiences, including his work at that organization. For these reasons and others, I oppose this nomination. If Judge Chen is confirmed today, I sincerely hope that he will prove me wrong. I sincerely hope that he will set aside his personal views and make decisions based solely on the facts and on the law. But based on the record before this senator, I fear that he will not be able to do so. Therefore, I will vote no on his confirmation. I yield the floor.
President. Senator from Tennessee.
President, on Friday, I visited Memphis to see the flooding along the Mississippi River myself, to meet with volunteers. On Friday, I visited Memphis to see the flooding along the Mississippi River myself and to visit with volunteers who were helping and to see the tremendously well-coordinated effort of emergency workers who are meeting and working every day long into the evenings and have been doing so for the last few weeks and will continue to do so for the next few. I want to make sure that as the federal government's role for helping arrives, that we're doing everything that we should be doing. It's quite a sight in Memphis. I mean, the Mississippi River today is 14 feet above flood stage. It's at a level that nearly equals the level in 1937. The river is normally a half mile wide. Today it's 3 miles wide. And a great many people in Tennessee and Arkansas have been evacuated because their homes are flooded with water. As we saw a year ago in the Tennessee floods, which stretched from Nashville to Memphis, and as I saw on last Monday in Hamilton County near Chattanooga, Tennesseans know how to respond to this kind of tragedy. They are doing it again by helping one another and helping to clean up rather than complaining and looting. It is an impressive sight. Bob Nations, who is the director of the Shelby County Emergency Management Agency, presides over daily meetings of maybe 50 or 60 people from a variety of volunteer and governmental sources who are carefully coordinated to deal with everything from watching the levees to looking for sand boils to helping people evacuate to dealing with utilities that may be threatened by flooding. You're doing a tremendous job. Colonel Vernie Richling, commander of the Memphis District Corps of Engineers, was there on Friday. He's had a tough couple of weeks. He was the one who had to make the decision to blow up a levee in Missouri, which hurt families in that area, but saved towns, whole towns that are downriver in the Mississippi River from irreparable damage in northwest Tennessee and also in Missouri. He was there providing us with the latest information, and overall the Corps' work has been exemplary. So far, none of the levees around Memphis have been breached, and it appears none will be breached despite the high water. The National Weather Service, both state and local officials, have been an important part of the effort. The University of Memphis has contributed daily maps that will predict where the water will go, which have proved to be fairly accurate, which is enormously helpful in helping the volunteers and others find a way to help people evacuate when they need to be evacuated or before they need to be evacuated. I visited with volunteers who were filling sandbags near the pyramid. These included off-duty military personnel from the Navy base nearby. These included people from land that's going to stay dry in other parts of Shelby County. They just knew that somebody needed to help. I traveled to Mud Island, where the floodwaters continue to rise. Officials still predict that as many as 3,000 properties and 6 schools can be affected by the flooding. One of the most impressive stories is that of Hope Presbyterian Church and its pastor, Craig Strickland. The church has organized up to 13 shelters, each of which could hold 150 to 200 individuals. Two of them were filled when I was there on Friday. More of them are filling up. All of this is being done without any cost to the government, without any cost to the individuals who are being sheltered there. It's all being provided by the churches and the synagogues of Memphis. And Reverend Strickland and Hope Presbyterian Church deserve an enormous credit for the role they are playing, along with others in Shelby County. The federal government, through the efforts of the Corps, are leading the fight. This is the largest flood in the history of the Mississippi River and Tributaries Project. The Mississippi is the third largest watershed. The problem is caused because it receives 600% more rainfall than it normally does in a span of 2 weeks. That the Corps says just came in all the wrong places. Over 4 million people are protected by the comprehensive Mississippi River and Tributaries Project, and it's being tested in ways that it never has before. But this system, so far, is performing as designed. The Corps has made the tough choices that I talked about earlier. It's going to continue to need to make tough choices as the water moves south. The Memphis District's been fighting the flood since the 24th day of April, relying on 500 people working 24 hours a day around the clock. The federal government, through FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is also helping state and local officials evacuate those in harm's way in advance of the floodwater. Governor Haslam of Tennessee has requested, and our entire delegation supported our state's request for emergency evacuation assistance to help move residents in Dyer, Lake, Shelby, and Stewart counties to higher ground. The President responded quickly, and we thank him for that. Over the weekend, the congressional delegation also supported Governor Haslam's request for federal assistance to help victims in 15 more counties recover from the flood and severe storms that began impacting our state on April 19. Actually, this is a different sort of request. The first was evacuation. This is to help those recover. The record rainfall and flooding has only added to the devastation caused by the storms. Last night, I learned the President has approved Tennessee's request to make individual and public assistance available for families in the hardest hit areas. I would say to the Tennesseans who are affected by this, that now that the President has approved opportunities for individual assistance, I hope they will take advantage of this. There's a telephone number to call. It's 1-800-621-FEMA, 1-800-621-3362. Unfortunately, we've had some experience with this telephone number in Tennessee in the last year. The floods that came exactly a year ago, which hit counties from Nashville to Memphis, produced enormous devastation, $2 billion alone in Davidson County. And what we found with FEMA, that once the President had granted the assistance, that Tennesseans who called that telephone number got a quick response, usually had an inspector there within a few days, and in most cases, where there was damage, received a check of up to $30,000 within a few days. We hope that happens again, although we understand there is terrible devastation in hundreds of counties right now around the country, especially in Alabama and the eastern part of Tennessee. But I want to make sure that residents and neighbors in Tennessee know that that FEMA number, 1-800-621-FEMA, is available now to be called. First thing they'll do is ask for your zip code. After that, they'll have a chance to provide help. The most important thing that Tennesseans can do in preparation for that is to document the losses. This flood will impact our state for weeks. The river only crested last night, second highest flood stage ever recorded. It'll take days for the waters to recede. Only then will we know the true extent of the damage. The volunteers and the emergency crews and the church shelters will be open for a long time after today. I am proud of the Tennesseans who are responding, from the Corps of Engineers personnel to the Hope Presbyterian Church shelters to the professionals with Mr. Nations. It's an admirable sight. Senator Corker and I and our entire delegation are working together to make sure that we do all we can to expedite federal help in response to this historic disaster that's occurred in the western part of our state. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the two letters I'm passing to the desk be included in the congressional record immediately following my remarks. They are the two letters that our delegation has sent to the President asking a request for a declaration for disaster assistance.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. The Senate is considering a judicial nomination for Edward Chen as a U.S. District Judge in Northern California. He was a lawyer for the ACLU. Several Republican senators said that he would be an activist judge. Today, President Obama is in El Paso, Texas, talking about immigration at 3:30 Eastern Time. We'll have live coverage on C-SPAN 3. A couple of stories about that. The President saying that he's going to press Congress to take up legislation overhauling the immigration system. The Congressional Quarterly writing that the El Paso speech, which will follow a border visit by the President, is the latest in a series of high-profile meetings in recent weeks, during which Obama has sought to show he's taking the issue seriously. A senior administration official offered few specifics Monday about what the president will propose in the speech, but indicating that the White House will release a blueprint today. And Politico saying that President Obama heads to Texas toting a pledge to jumpstart work on a comprehensive immigration bill, a long-awaited, never-attained goal of a Hispanic community that is crucial to the president's hopes of winning southwestern states in 2012. That's in Politico. Again, the president will be live on C-SPAN 3 at 3:30 Eastern Time, talking about immigration in El Paso, Texas.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, it is my honor to be here today to support the nomination of Judge Edward Chen to the Northern District Court of California. I congratulate Justice Judge Chen, and I congratulate his family on this momentous day that is long overdue. I want to thank Senator Feinstein for her hard work and her leadership in support of Judge Chen's nomination. The way we do our judge recommendations in California, I think is just exemplary. What we do is we each have a committee that advises us. and they come up with the names of a few people that they think are the top choices. And then each of us makes that recommendation to the President. And Judge Chen was her nominee. And he has had a distinguished career. And he enjoys broad support and respect in California's legal community. And when I heard the remarks of my colleague from Iowa, Senator Grassley, it really broke my heart, because it doesn't sound to me that he knows Judge Chen. He just seems to be criticizing someone else, someone who sets aside the law. That's not Judge Chen. Judge Chen will make an outstanding addition to the federal bench. Since 2001, Judge Chen has served as a magistrate judge in the Northern California District of California, where he has issued over 350 published legal opinions. Before coming to the bench, Judge Chen was a respected civil rights lawyer and part of the trial team that successfully overturned the wartime conviction of Fred Korematsu. He made history when he became the first Asian American magistrate judge to serve in the Northern District. And today, Judge Chen takes another history-making step if he is confirmed, and I surely hope that he will be, because when he is confirmed, he will be only the second Asian American in the 150-year history of the Northern District to be confirmed as a judge. And Mr. President, in our great nation, we are a melting pot. And I don't believe that you can really have the kind of justice that our founders envisioned unless we have juries of our peers and we have judges who also represent the broad quilt that is America. And I think this is something to talk about, not to ignore. While I'm proud that we are finally going to vote on the confirmation of Judge Chen, I have to again express frustration that it took so long to reach this point. Judge Chen was nominated over 21 months ago. And I ask everyone to think about this. The family, everybody waiting for this moment, years and years on the bench, an outstanding record. I mean, I remember attending Judge Chen's confirmation hearing in September '09. He was nominated for a judicial emergency seat, Mr. President, one that's been vacant since April 2008. That's a judicial emergency. We don't have enough judges. So one would think you would move quickly on this. Well, following his hearing, his nomination was held up by an unprecedented campaign of obstruction, unfortunately, by my friends in the Republican Party. They refused to allow an up or down vote, and they forced the White House to renominate Judge Chen not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. 4 times. And I tell you, I have read their objections, and they boil down to this. They objected because once he worked as a staff attorney for the ACLU, handling civil rights cases. Now, this is a man who received the highest rating from the American Bar Association. They gave him the well-qualified rating. And so I have to ask my colleagues why they would object to someone who did a good job defending the Constitution. I'm also, and by the way, I don't agree with the ACLU all the time. Believe me. I am surprised at this objection. For example, the ACLU and the Tea Party in my state right now in Northern California are working together to oppose free speech restrictions in front of the Reading Library. In fact, the ACLU and the Tea Party filed parallel lawsuits to strike down the restrictions. So my friends on the other side who give the Tea Party tremendous amount of support, I'm a little surprised that they would go after the ACLU, which is partnering with the Tea Party, in defending the Constitution. So, I mean, it's hard for me to believe that because Ed Chen was once a staff attorney for the ACLU, he would come under this kind of fire. They never objected to anything from his 9 years as a magistrate judge, Mr. President. Not one complaint about any of the opinions he has written. Judge Chen's record as a fair and impartial judge since 2001 demonstrates clearly that he understands the difference between being an advocate and being a judge. So I don't think that we should say anyone who was ever the staff attorney for this organization or that organization is barred from getting promoted here. That is a sad, sad thing. And I don't think people should be voted down or voted against because they stand up for equal rights and civil rights. If anything, we ought to say, that's great, because we all want our civil rights protected. We all want our rights that are guaranteed to us in the Constitution protected. Judge Roberts, Chief Justice, has called on senators to stop playing politics with judicial nominees, and I have to say, to me, this sounds like politics. You don't like an organization, so then you say someone who's been a judge for 9 years, you have no complaints about him, go back 10 years and now say, because you don't like that organization, they can't be promoted. Now, Chief Justice Roberts has warned that delays in filling vacancies has created acute difficulties in some judicial districts. That's a quote. Let me read it. He said, the delays in filling vacancies, quote, has created acute difficulties in some judicial districts. And certainly we know in this district we have been in an emergency situation. It is time to get Judge Chen seated so he can continue serving the people of Northern California as a district court judge. I commend Judge Chen for his strength and his perseverance over the past 21 months. This has not been an easy thing. I commend his family for standing by him. I again commend Senator Feinstein for fighting for him. And I commend everybody here who was able to somehow hammer out an agreement to have an up or down vote on this very talented man. So I close with great hopes that we're going to get this nominee confirmed. And in advance of that, and I hope I'm right in doing this, I want to congratulate Judge Chen and his family. And I do urge my colleagues to cast their votes to confirm this highly qualified and respected nominee to the Northern California District, and make history in doing so, and be proud in doing so, and know that when we put qualified people on the court who bring a different background to the court, that we're doing something very positive for America. That's what America is. I'm a first-generation American on my mother's side, and I can tell you what I learned from her, that we should kiss the ground of this country. And as I grew up, I realized that one of the great things about our country is that we are such an experiment in democracy. People from every background, every religion, differences. But we believe in one thing, and that is protection of our rights, and that is we believe in freedoms that we get from this nation, and we've got to protect those freedoms. And part of protecting those freedoms is to put people on the bench who understand that, as Benjamin Franklin once said, you have a republic if you can keep it. And the way to keep it is not to bar people from getting these up or down votes. Put good people on this bench. You can vote no, you can vote yes. Yes, there are times when we say we want a supermajority, but for Ed Chen, I can tell you right now, this isn't one of those times, and I look forward to his positive vote. I thank you very much, Mr. President. Would you consent? I ask unanimous consent that the time that is unused be charged to either side during the quorum calls.
Without objection, so ordered.
During the quorum calls, be charged to either side.
Without objection, so ordered.
And now I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
As we wait for another senator to come to the floor to speak, wanted to read another article about President Obama's trip to El Paso, Texas today. Washington Post writing that the president will stand on the U.S.-Mexico border and try to take credit for something that has eluded predecessors in both parties, successfully cracking down on illegal immigration. It's a record that Republicans dispute and that has drawn fire from many in Obama's Latino base. Washington Post goes on to write that the president is expected to reel off what his aides say is evidence of an unprecedented focus on border security. Hundreds of millions of dollars spent since he took office on high-tech fencing, aerial drones, and a doubling of the Border Patrol since 2004. Again, that's in the Washington Post. President Obama speaking in El Paso, Texas at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll have that live on C-SPAN 3.
Consent